I'm interested in the conclusion of your submission, where you say that we need to be mindful of the labour market impacts of any new measure. One of the characteristic features of the Irish labour market is its flexibility, and it has been argued that flexibility is one of the key factors supporting employment recovery and growth. Now, I think that remark itself says a lot about the determination of the Department to capture what is bogus self-employment and to understand it and to get the scale of it right, because there's something extraordinary about setting up a new web page that has 10,500 hits with 3 minutes on average spent on the page, and then getting a result on your scope section with just 50 calls and 30 emails. There's something wrong there. And I would suggest the problem is that bogus self-employment itself is not being captured because it creates a fear, it creates an oppression, and it creates an isolation, and it is being used increasingly to recruit and to exploit the labour of foreign workers, whether they come in here through agencies or they're resident here or they have become new members of our communities here. That is particularly the case. Now, those of us who are activists in our communities and in our trade unions, my trade union Unite has been tackling this for years, and I have attended pickets on all of them publicly financed projects. The National Children's Hospital, schools built, some of the schools that are controversial at the moment through Lucan and West Dublin, public housing projects, where the workers going on and off the site are bogusly self-employed. And instead of being on what is alleged the minimum wage, or indeed the construction industry norm of around 15 or 13 euro an hour, they end up actually earning about 4 or 5 euro an hour through that very process of having to create themselves as a letting on or a false company. And then they are paid a chunk of money without receiving any protection of unemployment benefit, sick benefit, and on top of that, generally speaking, they have to buy their own safety equipment and buy certs that will cover them to go on and off those sites, and these sites are antagonistic to trade union organisation. It's rampant, and to produce a document that said you can't prove that sounds like the department is being entirely ineffective in its pursuit of it. One question for you. Have you had any single prosecution of a bogus self-employment incident? And have you any more than a single one? How many have you had? And can we pursue more of these in order to go after them? Because your legislative procedures seem to be very, very weak. Your determination leaves a lot to be desired. But you talk here about the best way for us to proceed is identify, investigate and enforce through criminal prosecutions the false declaration of employment as self-employment. But we need to know what results you're getting in terms of prosecutions. And I note at the end that you said you're unable to discuss individual cases. Well, I think we're going to have to discuss, even if it's in broad sweep terms, we're going to have to discuss the construction industry, the amount of abuses in the construction industry that are taking place through state money that's been given to build the National Children's Hospital is the best example I can use. But I also want to ask you, because it's been publicly shared and known because of the response in industrial relations terms, do you consider the way Ryanair employs most of its pilots as bogus self-employment? In other words, that each pilot is employed on the basis of there you are, John Brady, go off and set up a company called John Brady Limited and engage an accountant from these companies, and we're telling you which ones to engage, and we will pay you through that. But you do not get to pay your PRSI, your taxes in the country you work in, which has led to certain Ryanair pilots being arrested in Germany or Britain by the revenue there because their taxes are being paid in Ireland rather than those countries. They benefit from the social structures in those countries and they're not contributing to the PRSI system. Do you consider that to be bogus self-employment? Or if you don't, then what is your description of bogus self-employment? Because I certainly would, the Ryanair pilots certainly do, and in fact it has been described as social dumping. The cost to the state in the construction industry, figures are already given by Congress, but there's massive cost to the state in the airline industry and beyond. And you list a lot of industries there. You don't, however, list the airline industry, and I would argue that there's a big offence taking place there.
Thank you, Deputy Smith. Just one comment to...
I want to come back to the question of inspections and prosecutions, because we know you're saying you do random and individual inspections, but we don't know what those inspections entail. So, for example, could you walk into a building site, let's say at the National Children's Hospital tomorrow, and go straight to the contractor and say, I want to see your books, I want to see who's paying what and who's employed where? And if you do that with a deal of scrutiny, I think you would come up with a much tighter report than what you've given us here, because the conclusions in your report is that the prevalence of self-employment is in fact diminishing. I just don't believe it. I just don't believe it. Even in my own life, I know so many people who are caught in bogus self-employment as a way of making their living, whether it's in the food industry, the airline industry, the construction industry, whatever. I just do not believe that you cannot do better than this and collect data and have in front of us something that is meaningful. And therefore, I really do question the level of inspection, what it entails, because if it's anything like this report, then it's pretty poor. The other thing I'd like to ask you is on state contracts, because there's a huge amount of money goes out on state contracts for schools, hospitals and other buildings, and a huge amount of bogus self-employment takes place in those building sites and in those construction sites. Does the state, or can you as a department, ensure that into those contracts is put a series of guarantees and penalties that this contractor will not employ on bogus self-employment terms? If you don't do it, could you please look at doing it, because I think it would be a deterrent. If not, it should lead to proper prosecutions if it's broken. And secondly, I just want you to tell me again, has the Department of Social Protection ever prosecuted on the basis of bogus self-employment? Because what I heard, you said it quite quickly, was that you've done it, but not as a department. It's gone through revenue. And if you have, how many times and whom have you prosecuted?
Senator Higgins.
Yes, so just in terms of the success of the outreach campaign, I'm just quoting from your own slide.